Hi, today we're going to learn how to take your back wheel off of your bike. You may need to do this if you have a flat tire and you need to change out your tube. We're going to practice on the back wheel because it's a little more complex, but these same things will work for your front wheel. So the three things that you need to do to take it on and off is 1, change to your lowest gear in the back, 2, disengage your brakes, and 3, loosen your axle. So we're going to do this twice on 2 different bikes so we see the different kinds of brakes and axles. So let's start on this bike over here. So if you come around to yonder, you'll see that I have shifted to my smallest gear in the back. That's the gear that's farthest away from the bike. There are 2 reasons for doing this. 1, you know which gear you put it on. So when you're putting the wheel back on, it'll be clear of like, oh yes, I put it on the smallest one. Second is now we have a lot of extra chain here. More chain to just play with gives you just a little bit more space. So we shifted to that smallest gear there. The next thing we want to do is disengage our brakes. So these are rim brakes. You can tell because it's pinching in on the rim. And there are a bunch of different kinds of these, so you'll have to check out which kind your bike has. But for these, the way you disengage it is I'll pull this cord back and hold this steady, and it will open, and you'll see that. Ta-da! There we are. And now let's talk about the axle type that we have. So this is a quick release. You can see it has a nut here on this side, and this side is a quick lever. And if you want to look at this bike over here just a second, I know, hard to find, this has a bolt here where a quick release would be. And so you just take a wrench and do the same thing. There's a bolt on the other side too, so you'd want to hold that steady, but you just loosen it up with a wrench versus the quick release that you just open up. So once you get it off, same concept. So I'll show you here with the quick release. I'm going to open it up with that left hand. Great, and so it practically drops right out. If it's a little stuck, you may want to loosen it even more by turning it to the left. And you can see here that this is kind of almost stuck on this chain. That's what's holding it in place right now. So I'm going to pull this derailleur back, and it opens it right up for you to take it right out, just like that. Perfect. So then you can take off the tire, change out your tube, any of that business before you put it back in. So when we put it back in, we're going to get on that smallest gear again, since that's what we shifted it to. There we are. I'm just going to pull it back up. Great. And I'm just going to tighten this temporarily because we want to put the whole bike on the ground when we tighten it for real, because, oh, there we go, because we want it to sit really well into those notches and not have any extra space. So that is tightened, and we'll talk about how tight to put it in just a second. And remember always to engage those brakes again. Ta-da! Great! So now let's try it on a different bike a minute. So this bike, we're going to do the same thing, that we have the chain all the way to the smallest gear in the back, and I'm going to flip it over just to add that aspect to it. You can either do it pulling it up this way, or I kind of like to roll it all over. It's going to be weird the first times you try and do this, so don't worry so much about it. You'll get the hang of it. So we have it in the smallest gear, and the brakes on this are a disc brake. So instead of pinching in on the rim, there's pads down here that pinch in on this disc. If you have disc brakes, you don't need to disengage them. You can just pull the wheel right out. The one thing that you should keep in mind with disc brakes is if they're actuated by hydraulic disc brakes instead of a cable, then you don't want to be pinching on these brakes that control your back wheel. So that'd be the other side. because that's going to mess up your hydraulic system. If you're not sure what you have, just don't mess with the brakes and you'll be fine. But that's just a little tidbit. So our brakes are good to go. We're in the smallest chain ring. Now I'm going to open up my axle here, and this is what's called a through axle. So it looks kind of like a quick release, what we had before. So I'm going to do the same thing, turning to the left. But you'll notice there's no nut on the other side because it's integrated into the axle there. So you don't have to worry about a nut on the other side. It's just integrated. So leaving that be a second. Then I'm going to pull the wheel out just like we did before. I'm going to push that derailleur back so that's out of the way. Ta-da! Great. And I'm just going to put it right back in. So making sure my cables don't get in the way. So we're going to make sure it's on that small gear again. Oh, and one thing to mention, sorry, before I get ahead of myself, is it's a little tricky to see, but this is where your disc goes into that disc brake between these two little pads here. So when you put your wheel back in, you want to make sure the disc goes in between there, and be pretty gentle because you don't want to bend that disc right there. And also try to not touch it so much with your hands because it's not good to leave the oils from your fingers on that disc. So just be cautious around it and give yourself some time. So I'm going to put it back in. I'm going to set it on that small gear like I did before. I'm just watching to make sure it's not hitting too hard against anything, that it's going to fit in that little slot. It's looking pretty good. There we go. There we are. So now I'm going to re-engage that through axle. Righty-tighty. Am I doing it righty-tighty? Oh, there we go. Great. One thing to mention with through axles or quick releases is that you don't need to put them super tight. That's about as tight as you want to do it, that pressure, because you want to be able to take it off with about 2 fingers. Any more pressure than that doesn't really help the bike. It's just too much pressure on the axle. It doesn't make it any safer for you. So that was a lot of information, but it's just those same 3 steps that change it to your smallest gear in the back, release your brakes, and then loosen your axle. And just give yourself time when you're going through these. There's no reason to rush. It's going to feel frustrating for the first little bit, but after a couple times doing it, it'll get a lot cleaner, feel a lot better. I hope that you found this helpful today. My name is Amy Corver, and I'm the Community Education Manager here at Cascade.